Welcome and thank you for joining me. I am Verona. This is Just Another Voice.
We love superheroes. Throughout history, people of all cultures have told stories of larger-than-life beings and their grand exploits. The stories of our own comic book heroes and their battles with alien menaces aren't that different from the legends of gods and demigods conquering the demons and monsters that would threaten humanity. It's not new to invent these kinds of superhuman beings as gods that we can look up to and strive to emulate. The heroes of a people or generation say a lot about them as they embody aspects of human nature and the cultural zeitgeist. And just like those who invented those ancient heroes, we're not content to make up a handful. No, we've made pantheons of our own that over the last near century have grown to rival any of ancient mythologies. There have been more superheroes created in the 83 years since they first appeared in comic books than I'm sure anyone can count. I would be surprised if there's a person alive who can name them all. And yet there are two that, no matter who you are or where you are from, if you are watching this video, even if somehow you didn't see the thumbnail or read the title, I can guarantee, without a doubt, that you know them well. Batman and Superman. These two titans are easily the most iconic characters ever invented, at least in the modern Western world. But why these two? Is it just because they are the first two of their kind to enter the medium of comics? Perhaps that's part of it, but there were many, many others to pop up in the very short time after, and unless you're fairly well versed in comic lore, which, let's face it, you likely are if you clicked on this video, you most likely have never heard of most of them. Yet, while many of those died away or were drastically reinvented come the Silver Age, these two icons remained and endured mostly unchanged. There was something there in this pair of opposites that over time was keyed in upon and explored by writers and artists over the decades. These gods have evolved and grown in complexity as we have tried to figure out what makes them so endearing.
I have always adored both of these figures. Superman was my idol as a child, and as I grew older, I became more fascinated with the darkness and complexity of Batman and his world. There's never been a time when I didn't appreciate both. And as I've grown, I've wondered why. What makes them so endearing, and why do they mean so much to so many? Because they're not like other comic book characters. Most superheroes are looked at by their fans simply as awesome and often inspiring characters. But Batman and Superman are beloved, even revered by their fans, like no other superheroes I've ever seen. In a way, they are as much gods in the real world as in the DC universe. Yet they are so fundamentally different from one another that it's not surprising that they tend to appeal to different people. Each has something different to teach and instill, something different to be explored. And quite often, those who love one tend not to truly appreciate the other. But why? I've spent a great deal of time studying and pondering these heroes and all their layers, what makes them tick as characters, and what each embodies, what makes them so versatile and relevant to any time or place. What makes us love to pair them together, whether as friends or as enemies, almost as if they are two halves of a whole, two sides of one argument. Is it just that one shows his face and flies through the sky in broad daylight, while the other hides behind a mask and lurks in the shadows? Is it just that one is a literal god with ludicrous levels of power, and one is but a mere mortal in a costume? Is it that one wears hope on his chest and the other strikes terror into his enemies? Or is there something else entirely that makes them each so interesting? I believe there's more than one simple answer here, and that all the observations I just mentioned are part of it. But I think I may have stumbled upon the true heart of the dichotomy between them, and I did so in pondering over a film that many have been quick to dismiss as an atrociously bungled misunderstanding and misrepresentation of its characters. And, well, I suppose that's an understandable opinion when Superman rarely smiles and Batman's a merciless killer. As you may be able to tell, I have a complicated relationship with Batman v Superman. It is far from a great movie. It would be charitable to call it deeply flawed, crippled might be more accurate, by poor writing on many levels. It fully deserves most even, of the criticism it receives. But it seems the vast majority of people who hate it let its problems completely blind them to the things it does so well, while many who appreciate its great elements simply choose to ignore its deep, even fundamental faults, as I used to, and even go so far as to attack those who dare to point them out. It unfortunately seems this movie is beloved mostly by the pretentious crowd that arrogantly and condescendingly claims that anyone who dares criticize something they love just isn't intelligent enough to understand it. And I don't want to sound like one of those people. I greatly appreciate films that are more than soulless spectacle and use metaphors and subtextual undertones to explore complex and compelling ideas. But doing so, or attempting to do so, doesn't make a film great if the writing is simply crap and those ideas aren't handled with any degree of tact. So before getting into what I feel the film does so well, I want to acknowledge its undeniable problems and briefly explain why it failed. But I'm not going to. I originally wrote a few paragraphs in my first script looking at how this movie was written and why it's such an utter disaster on a plot and character level. But I'm not here to tear apart this movie. That's not what you came here for. That's already been done to death, and I'll link a few of my favorite critiques and overall reviews in a playlist in the description. I just wanted to point out its main flaws, to make it clear that I'm not blind to them, and I don't arrogantly hold the pretentious belief that, because it contains some good that I love, anyone with issues with it is just a moron with no taste in entertainment. As a well written, paced, and developed story with internal logic, emotional investment, and genuine stakes, Batman v Superman is an unmitigated disaster. But I'll forbear from going down that rabbit hole any further until I can devote a video to analyzing and fixing its major issues, which I fully intend to do when I get the chance. But for now, let's focus on what this film taught me about its characters. This movie approaches the world in which it takes place in a way I'd never seen before in a mainstream superhero film. It explores a world much like our own, as if it was our own, in the wake of a devastating confrontation with alien life, trying to figure out how to react to the sudden existence of a god living among mortals. I think we're used to seeing the worlds of superheroes looking something like this: ordinary innocents, superheroes beloved by the regular people, and the supervillains from which they protect us. But Snyder decided to take these iconic characters we think we know so well and explore them in a new way by plopping them in the real world, so to speak, and seeing what happens. And it turns out the resulting landscape's a lot more complicated than one of heroes and villains. Sure, stories across mediums such as The Boys do the same sort of thing, and arguably far better at what they hope to accomplish, but they all use twisted versions of the characters we love, and tend to like making superheroes into total psychopathic douchebags. BvS actually tries to explore the characters we know and love in this type of world without corrupting them for the sake of the story they want to tell. As I'll discuss, that doesn't mean Snyder always handled the characters well, at all, but he didn't deliberately betray them. Anyway, back to BvS. Turns out, the world doesn't see the distinction between the good gods and the bad gods quite so clearly. Gods are gods, and when they go to war, people die. And not all the regular people are content to rely on the good gods to always remain the good gods, and to always fight and win their battles with the bad gods. People in this world have had everything they thought they knew turned upside down, and are justifiably afraid. Many in their fear are happy to look to Superman as a savior and protector, but this is a cynical world, and it's not long before people forget their salvation and start to question the righteousness of their protector, especially when he's forced to make tricky decisions in the messy real world, which not everyone agrees with. And can you blame them? It's hardly their fault they don't want to wait around for the indestructible being in the sky to decide he's done being a benevolent messiah and wants to be a dictator. Lex Luthor may be the world's greatest psychopathic narcissist, but he's not entirely wrong. Alright, so back to the point of the video. How does this world these characters find themselves floundering in affect them? And how does it reveal what makes them so iconic? Well, let's start with Superman. This version of the Superman mythos does not shy away in the least from parallels with Christ. That much is obvious, and many people criticize Snyder for indulging in religious imagery to heavy handedly make a point without any real meaningful substance to the story behind it. But I disagree. Well, sort of. They are right that he does tend to rely on that to make his point without a story that really supports it. But I think there is a point to it. This story, this world, serves as a metaphor for our own, and uses this world's relationship with Superman to explore our own relationship to the divine. It's an exploration of faith, of our response to the unknown. Superman is a symbol of hope. Well, okay, everyone knows that, but what does that really mean? Well, I think you could also say he is a symbol of faith. Superman personifies our faith in the divine and our gods, the beings and ideals in which we place that faith. Faith is trusting in a will beyond our own, looking to an ideal of some kind, something beyond corruption, something that can't be measured or defined, for hope, comfort, peace, and strength in uncertainty and adversity. Faith is believing these ideals, these absolutes exist, when empirical evidence fails to provide them, because they give us something to hold on to strive for, a purpose to follow, a reason to be better. In the terrifying abyss of the unknown, in the existential void that haunts us, and which science fails to fill, knowing that there is some fundamental good in the world worth striving for that cannot be marred or destroyed gives life meaning and purpose and brings hope to an otherwise dark and terrifying world. And this Superman embodies that quite literally as a savior, an actual god to humanity. He becomes a living messiah to the human race when he saves them from a terrifying threat beyond their own abilities to combat or comprehend. He becomes a source of peace in this world where gods walk among men and aliens may choose to annihilate us at any moment because no matter what, there is Superman to protect us. There is something we can look to for our salvation and take comfort in knowing will always be there. That is, until the shock wears off. Because this is our world this story takes place in, a world dominated by fear, distrust, and cynicism. One where man takes pride in his own flesh and is slow to turn to his God for strength. One where the unknown is viewed with skepticism and faith is dismissed as blind weakness. Lex Luthor is the prideful man who believes himself above the faith of those weak enough to let themselves be ruled by their gods, and despises the very idea of such a being whose existence emphasizes his own mortality. This is the world in which Superman finds himself, a world which is largely turned against its own savior in fear and jealousy. And here is where the film meets its greatest failing. It tries to show Clark as a good but fallible human being, struggling with the challenge of being a savior to a people who are actively rejecting him. He wants to be the savior, the beacon of hope humanity needs, but as they spit in his eye and push him away, he can't help but be discouraged and wonder how he can possibly do his job while being rejected by those he serves. He asks himself if humanity is even worth saving, if anything he can do will ever make a difference, if they only insist on scourging and reviling him and all he embodies. He has his own crisis of faith. In theory, if handled well, this idea with which Snyder approached Superman as a character in this film could make for a very compelling story as Superman sets out to rediscover the good in humanity that he has lost sight of, and reassure himself that his quest is worth it. Unfortunately, Zack spends way more time making him look grim and edgy than actually developing him as a character, and he doesn't give him any kind of arc to become more like the Superman we know and love, more like the savior humanity really needs. Except that in the end he dies fighting a big monster, I guess. Nor does the film even have the guts to lean into a dark and disillusioned Superman and take him down an injustice style path. It just doesn't really do anything with him in the story, and as a result, he's both a static and a passive character. In fact, he's hardly a character at all, with no real form of agency, acting with no reason or consistency, just to make the plot happen. He's easily the worst problem with, or perhaps to be fair, the worst victim of this movie. Sorry, I couldn't help but go down the rabbit hole that time. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh, right. Faith. This version of Superman really emphasizes his divinity, so to speak. And in this, many will complain that Snyder made a huge mistake and proved he doesn't truly get the character in forgetting to display his humanity over his divinity, as I'm sure many of you have already told me in the comments. However, I believe this was a deliberate choice. Future me here, I just want to interrupt my past self to say that while I do think Snyder had something going here, which is what I want to focus on in this video, you would be 100% correct in saying that he should have focused more on what makes him human, on having him be a compassionate hero out of altruism more than just being a vague, untouchable symbol in the sky. In fact, while he constantly compares him to Christ, in so doing, he kind of misses the whole point of who Christ really is. Just want to make it clear that I get that issue and completely agree. I just didn't really go into it here because I wanted to focus in this video on what we can learn from this movie's depiction, which I'm actually still just setting up, so don't worry, because the real meat of the video is still to come. Back to you, other me. Snyder obviously wanted to draw a line between Superman and Christ, and in case you think that's hijacking a character for religious propaganda, that's not it at all. You don't necessarily have to be particularly religious to appreciate the point of this comparison. Whether we believe in a particular deity or not, it's natural for us to place our faith in ideals. And isn't God essentially a living ideal? Don't we believe in God because he is everything in which we naturally place our faith personified? How is Superman any different? Like our deities, he is a beacon to look up to in the unknown, and reminds us of the good in each of us, that there is always good in this world, and we can't afford to forget that, to give up on it, because it is only by first believing in that good that we can then fight for it, that we can run towards the light. We need beings like Superman to remind us of that, and to give flesh to the ideals we so desperately need. He gives us something to look to in our darkest moments, and to trust will never fail us. But that's not what the movie did well. If that was all I had to say for BvS, I wouldn't even mention it, because I didn't need Snyder to put Superman in a crucifixion pose to make me see the parallels between him and Christ. No, the real gem of BvS is how it contrasted its other title character against the symbol of the divine, and in so doing revealed what sets them apart from one another. So let's finally talk about where this movie really triumphs. Batman in this film is rather controversial, largely due to, you know. But if it weren't for that, which I agree is purely down to Snyder not appreciating the significance of the one rule that defines him and wanting the film to be more violent, I mean, he's pretty much admitted to that. I actually think this would be tied for the best live action depiction of Batman with Robert Pattinson's. And not just for the physicality. The reason why goes all the way back to the first scene of the movie. As we're shown what turns out to be a childhood dream of young Bruce running through the woods and falling down the fateful well as he relives his parents' brutal murder, Ben Affleck's narration tells us, there was a time before, a time above. There were perfect things, diamond absolutes. But things fall, things on earth, and what falls is fallen. We then watch as that time before comes to a horrifying end, as those diamond absolutes are shattered by two bullets in the street, and Bruce falls from that time above. Then come the bats, and as fear fades as they carry him up to the shaft, the voice tells us, they took me into the light. A beautiful lie. And Batman was born. He once believed the ideals Superman represents, that there are perfect things, that people are ultimately good, that there are such absolutes as justice. A child's belief. But all that came to a harsh end that night, the night he fell. He saw the light for the lie it was, and that time before was lost to memory. He saw the world in its naked horror, dark, cold, careless, and cruel. As Bruce tells Superman later in their fight, I bet your parents taught you that you mean something, that you were sent here for a reason. My parents taught me a different lesson, dying in the gutter. They taught me the world only makes sense if you force it to. And that is why he became Batman. He saw the evil of the world for the first time, the chaos, the injustice, But rather than succumb to it, or worse, embrace it, laugh at it, revel in it like his greatest nemesis, he chose to fight it. He forged himself into a weapon capable of punching and terrifying the world into a semblance of justice and order. He harnessed his own demons, his own vengeance, his shadow self, as a weapon to fight the darkness, with darkness. He saw the world for what it was, and saw that the only way to combat it was with the tools it gave him. Rather than let his trauma scar him, he took it and made it into something he could use to strike back at the world that had tried to break him. As Pattinson's Batman says, our scars can destroy us, but if we survive them, they can give us the power to endure and the strength to fight. This Batman seems to have had glimpses of the good in humanity again over the years, particularly with Robin, whose light and resilience in spite of his own trauma brought some light into Bruce's life again. But every time he found some semblance of joy in his world, it was cruelly and brutally taken from him, leaving him ever more vengeful and embittered, to the point that when this god appears in the sky claiming to be a symbol of hope, of truth, to stand for the good in humanity, Bruce instantly hates him, for he knows everything he stands for is a lie. Nothing is incorruptible, nothing is fundamentally good. The only truth is that which you force upon the world. The only justice is that which you make for yourself. How dare you come down from your throne above and condescend to us mortals, when you don't know what it's like to feel pain, to be beaten, to have everything taken from you, and be left alone, weak, helpless, afraid. You've never seen the world from down here. You're not brave. Men are brave. That's what the fight is about. Sure, his justification is that he's protecting the world from this alien threat, but really, he just wants to make this god who's never had to suffer, to struggle, to fight just to survive, who's never had to work for his strength, feel what it's like to be mortal, and tear down the idol of his godhood. But then, save Martha! This god is afraid of losing his mother, just as he once lost his. He's a man, and going through everything he did that night so long ago, his world is about to be taken from him. In that moment, Batman remembers that boy, alone and scared, and chooses never to let that happen again. He remembers what he started fighting for in the first place, to stop anyone else from going through everything he did ever again. This man will not have to go through that. He will not have to become like himself. Bruce may have fallen, but this man doesn't have to. And then that man gives his life to save a world that rejected him, out of a belief in everything he stood for, in spite of all the world threw at him. It's not just a vain ideal, a beautiful lie, or even if it is, it's still worth believing in. Men are still good, weak, foolish, and flawed, but still capable of good, still capable of overcoming, and worth fighting for. He sees the light again, and sees how all these years he hasn't been so different from those he's fought. He sees that people need beings like Superman to turn them towards the light. They need their ideals, because without them, what are we? Even if the light is a lie, to forget or deny its existence is to become lost in the darkness entirely. Batman walks a fine line, harnessing the darkness within him for good, weaponizing the vengeance the world gave him to fight back against it. But this Batman has become so disillusioned with the light, after decades of loss and pain, that he needed Superman to remind him of it, to save him from becoming lost to that with which he has struck such a delicate balance. And he finally came to recognize why we need a Superman. So what is it that defines these two icons? What did this movie teach me about the dichotomy between them? I think the real fundamental difference between Batman and Superman here is ultimately ideological, and the reason each of them is so inspiring to certain people comes down to their worldview and philosophy. Superman is a god, a beacon of hope, and a source of faith to those searching for ideals to strive towards, reminding us of the good in each of us, while Batman embodies the strength of the human spirit to fight on and endure amidst the darkness and chaos, to grow from even the greatest trauma, and to take what the world has thrown at us and throw it right back. Superman is a light to lead us out of the dark, while Batman takes his strength from the dark. But Superman tells us there is a fundamental higher good we all can look up to and strive for. Batman tells us any real good in this world is up to us to make for ourselves. Superman embodies the power we draw on from above, the dreams that inspire and lift us up, and Batman, the innate power in each of us to endure and harness our pain and build ourselves into something more. While these ideas of strength, of good, of heroism are fundamentally different, I think it's worth appreciating what each of them have to teach us and why each of them means so much to others. The faithful, the religious, and just the idealistic look up to Superman for hope and inspiration, for reminders of the light in all of us, while those grown embittered against the darkness of the world take courage from Batman's ability to turn his own worst demons into strength. But we can see the merit and power of both without diminishing either. In fact, BvS emphasizes the contrast between the two characters by pitting them against one another, but in the end, the two not only reach an understanding, but come to learn from one another and become more as a result. So maybe if we all take a look at one another and the way we each see the world, and honestly try to understand, we can all learn how to become the best we can be and make the world a better place together. Man, that was corny. This video was initially going to be my attempt to break down and rewrite Batman v Superman and make a film that dealt with everything it tried to in an effective way. But I really struggled with a lot of the plot issues and making it all smooth and seamless, retaining what I liked from the original while fixing the massive problems and just making it all more compelling. It was just taking too long, and I knew I wouldn't finish it in time before my mission. If you've been around the channel lately, you know I'm serving a 2-year mission for my church soon. In fact, I'll be publishing this right before I start my training. Thus, I'm afraid to say this will be my last video for the next couple years. I have thoroughly enjoyed this experiment of sorts, even when I struggled to make time for it. And I'm sad at having to walk away for so long, as I had a lot of videos I wanted to make before leaving. But don't worry, because I'll be back as soon as possible, and I promise, my first priority will be getting decent audio equipment and learning more advanced editing to make my videos way easier to watch and listen to. So subscribe, and make sure that bell's on so you'll know when I return. There are so many things I still want to do here, so I'll leave you with some teases for what I plan to give you when I get back. Until then, never stay silent.